The autumn sky hung heavy over the small Ohio town, a bruised gray that seemed to press down on the modest two-story house where Eleanor Harris lived. Leaves, brittle and brown, skittered across the cracked driveway, catching in the overgrown shrubs that framed the sagging porch. The house, once alive with laughter and warmth, now felt hollow, its peeling paint and overstuffed mailbox whispering neglect. Inside, a faint glow spilled from the living room where Eleanor sat, her silver hair pulled into a loose bun, her hands trembling as they worked a pair of knitting needles. At 62, she was frail, her body worn from years of raising three children alone after her husband Tom passed. The scarf she knitted, blue like the one she'd made for her son Michael years ago, grew slowly, each stitch a quiet act of hope. Her eyes, heavy with exhaustion, flickered with a mix of longing and resignation as she glanced at the clock. 6:15 p.m. The TV hummed softly, a local news channel droning about a coming storm, its light casting shadows across faded family photos on the mantel. Kids at a county fair, Eleanor beaming beside Tom, their smiles frozen in time. "They'll be home soon," Eleanor murmured to herself, her voice barely audible. "Maybe tonight we'll eat together." She set the knitting aside, wincing as her knees creaked, and shuffled toward the kitchen. The room was a mess, dirty dishes piled in the sink, a half-empty pizza box sprawled on the counter. Eleanor pulled ingredients from the fridge, ground beef, onions, a can of tomatoes, and began preparing chili, the kids' favorite from childhood. Her movements were deliberate but shaky, her high blood pressure a constant shadow. Pausing, she gazed at a photo taped to the fridge. Her three children, Michael, Sarah, and Jake, laughing in a pile of autumn leaves, their faces bright with joy. A sad smile crossed her lips. "Where did the time go?" she whispered. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and her heart lifted. Wiping her hands on her apron, she checked the screen, hoping for connection. A text from Michael, her eldest. "Stuck at work. Won't make it tonight, sorry." Her face fell, the words cutting deeper than they should. She typed a reply. "Okay, love you," but her thumb hovered over the send button. With a sigh, she set the phone down, the message unsent. Upstairs, in a bedroom cluttered with energy drink cans and glowing screens, Jake Harris, 27 and lanky, hunched over his computer, headset clamped over his ears. The screen flashed with explosions, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he barked commands to his online teammates. "Yo, cover me. I'm going for the flank. Don't screw this up," he shouted, oblivious to the faint clatter from the kitchen below, where Eleanor had dropped a spoon. His world was the game, the house and his mother mere background noise. Across town, in a downtown coffee shop, Sarah Collins, 34, sat at an outdoor table, her thrift store blazer slightly wrinkled as she pitched a logo design to a skeptical client. Her laptop screen glowed with a half-finished design, her voice tinged with forced enthusiasm. "This captures your brand's energy. Modern, bold. I can tweak it by tomorrow if you sign tonight," she said, her smile tight. The client frowned, unimpressed. "It's fine, but I expected more for the price. I'll think it over." Sarah's jaw clenched, her financial struggles a weight she couldn't shake. Her phone vibrated, a call from Eleanor. She glanced at it, annoyance flashing across her face, and silenced it. "Not now, Mom," she muttered. "I'm drowning here." Back at the house, Eleanor stirred the chili, its aroma filling the kitchen with warmth she hoped would draw her family together. She set the table for four, each place meticulous, cloth napkins, a small vase with wilted daisies. The clock read 7:30 p.m., but the house remained empty. The front door slammed, and Eleanor's face lit up, expecting company. It was only Jake, grabbing a soda from the fridge without a glance her way. "Jake, dinner's ready," she said, her voice hopeful. "I made chili. Sit with me?" He didn't look up, already halfway to the stairs. "Nah, I'm good. Got a tournament in 10. Maybe later," he mumbled, snagging a bag of chips. Eleanor watched him go, her shoulders slumping. "Later," she whispered, the word hollow. She sat alone at the table, the chili cooling in its pot. The TV shifted to a community segment, its announcer's voice bright and earnest. "If you're moved by stories of resilience and redemption, don't miss our documentary series. Subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt journeys like this one." Eleanor didn't hear it, her fork trembling as she picked at her food. Her mind drifted to a brighter memory. A sunny autumn afternoon 15 years ago, raking leaves in the backyard with young Michael, Sarah, and Jake. Their laughter echoed as they tossed leaves at each other, Eleanor pulling them into a group hug. "You're the best, Mom." Jake had grinned, his 12-year-old face alight with love. "And you're my troublemakers," she'd laughed. "Always will be." The memory faded, leaving her staring at the empty table. Eleanor cleared the untouched plates, her movements heavy with disappointment. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Sarah. "Need to borrow $500. Rent's due. Can you help?" Eleanor stared at the message, her savings already drained from Jake's borrowing. "What more can I give?" she whispered, pocketing the phone. Her head throbbed, a familiar warning of her high blood pressure. Determined to fetch her medication from her upstairs bedroom, she headed to the staircase, gripping the banister for support. The narrow staircase creaked under her weight, each step a struggle. Halfway up the second floor, her vision blurred, the world tilting. "Just get to the pills," she gasped, clutching her chest. Her foot caught on a loose carpet edge, and time seemed to slow. She tumbled backward, her body rolling down 2 flights of stairs with a sickening series of thuds. Her hip snapped, her thigh bone cracked, and her head struck the baseboard, a gash opening on her temple. Blood pooled beneath her, her knitting needles scattered like broken promises. She lay motionless, her breath shallow, the blue scarf tangled around her wrist. Upstairs, Jake remained glued to his game, the crash drowned out by his headset's gunfire and teammate chatter. "Hell yeah, we're crushing it," he shouted, oblivious to the tragedy below. Outside, Mrs. Carter, a kind-faced neighbor in her 60s, noticed the open front door and the eerie silence. She stepped closer, peering inside. "Eleanor, you okay?" she called, her voice tinged with concern. Her eyes landed on Eleanor's crumpled form, and she gasped. "Oh my God, Eleanor!" Rushing to her side, she checked for a pulse, finding it faint. Blood smeared the floor, and Mrs. Carter's hands shook as she dialed 911. "Please hurry," she cried into the phone. "My neighbor's hurt. She fell down the stairs. There's blood everywhere." The scarf, half finished, lay still in Eleanor's hand, a silent testament to her unyielding love. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and regret, its fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow over the waiting room where Michael, Sarah, and Jake sat in tense silence. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, its rhythm drowned out by the low hum of vending machines and the occasional beep of medical equipment echoing down the hall. Eleanor Harris lay in a room nearby, her body battered from her fall down 2 flights of stairs. Broken hip, fractured femur, a traumatic brain injury that left her life hanging in a fragile balance. The call from Mrs. Carter had pulled the siblings from their separate worlds. Michael from a late-night board meeting, Sarah from her cramped apartment, and Jake from his gaming marathon. Now they sat together, but the distance between them felt wider than ever. Michael, 38, his tie loosened and suit rumpled, paced the linoleum floor, his phone buzzing with unread work emails. His jaw was tight, his mind racing with deadlines and the looming cost of his mother's care. "This is a disaster," he muttered, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Surgery, rehab, maybe months of care. Who's got time for this?" His voice carried the weight of a man stretched thin by his corporate life, his wife, and 2 kids who barely saw him. He glanced at Sarah, who sat slouched in a plastic chair, her arms crossed, her face a mask of resentment. "Don't look at me," Sarah snapped, her voice sharp as she brushed a strand of dark hair from her eyes. At 34, she was drowning in freelance gigs that paid too little and rent that demanded too much. "I can't afford to chip in, Michael. You're the one with the fancy job. Why don't you handle it?" Her words dripped with bitterness. Years of feeling like the overlooked middle child, bubbling to the surface. She hadn't forgiven Eleanor for bailing Michael out of debt years ago while leaving her to scrape by. The call she'd ignored earlier, Eleanor's name flashing on her phone, now gnawed at her, but she pushed the guilt aside. Jake, sprawled across 2 chairs, scrolled through his phone, his hoodie pulled up to shield his face. At 27, he was a drifter in his own life, unemployed and tethered to his mother's house, where he'd taken more than he'd given. "This is Mom's fault," he muttered, not looking up. "She's always been clumsy. Why was she even on the stairs?" His tone was callous, but his fingers hesitated over the screen, a flicker of unease betraying his bravado. He'd heard nothing that night, lost in his game, and the image of Eleanor lying at the foot of the stairs, blood pooling, her scarf tangled, hadn't yet sunk in. A doctor, mid-40s, with tired eyes and a clipboard, approached them. Her voice was calm but firm, cutting through their tension. "Your mother's stable, but the injuries are severe. The fall caused a fractured hip, a broken femur, and a traumatic brain injury. She needs emergency surgery tonight to stabilize the fractures, but the head trauma is concerning. There's a risk she may not walk again, and her cognitive function could be impaired long term. We'll know more after the procedure." She paused, glancing at their strained faces. "Someone will need to coordinate her care. This will be a long recovery." Michael stopped pacing, his face paling. "How much is this going to cost?" he asked, his voice clipped. The doctor raised an eyebrow, but before she could respond, Sarah scoffed. "That's what you care about? Money? Typical." Michael rounded on her, his voice rising. "Don't start, Sarah. You're not exactly stepping up here. When's the last time you even visited Mom?" Sarah shot to her feet, her eyes blazing. "Oh, please, you're never around either. You think you're better because you've got a corner office? Mom's been alone for years, and you didn't notice." Jake snorted, still glued to his phone. "Both of you, chill. She's old. Stuff like this happens. Just put her in a home or something." The words landed like a slap, and even Michael and Sarah paused, stunned by his callousness. The doctor, sensing the rift, excused herself, leaving them to their argument. It escalated quickly, Michael blaming Sarah for her irresponsibility, Sarah accusing Michael of abandoning the family, Jake deflecting with snide remarks. The waiting room became a battleground, their voices echoing off the sterile walls, oblivious to the gravity of their mother's condition. In a hospital bed down the hall, Eleanor stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Pain seared through her body, her hip and leg immobilized in a temporary brace, her head throbbing from the gash now stitched and bandaged. The beeping of a heart monitor was a steady rhythm, grounding her in the haze of sedatives. She tried to move, but every muscle screamed in protest. Her mind, foggy from the trauma, clung to fragments of memory. The staircase, the loose carpet, the scarf slipping from her hands. Then voices, angry, familiar, drifted through the cracked door. She turned her head, wincing, and listened. "I'm not paying for this," Sarah's voice cut through. "I can barely keep my lights on. You figure it out, Michael." Michael's retort was sharp. "You think I've got endless cash? I've got kids, a mortgage. Mom's care isn't my job alone." Jake's laugh was bitter. "Why are we even fighting? Just send her to a nursing home. Problem solved." Eleanor's heart sank, each word a dagger. She'd raised them, sacrificed everything, her savings, her dreams, her health, to give them a chance. And now, reduced to a burden, she was nothing more than a problem to be solved. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. With trembling hands, she gripped the bedrail, her body screaming as she pulled herself upright. The pain was unbearable, but the ache in her heart was worse. She reached for the crutch propped nearby, her fingers shaking as she maneuvered it under her arm. The hospital gown hung loose on her frail frame, and every step felt like a betrayal of her broken body. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay to hear more. The hallway was quiet, the night staff too busy to notice an old woman hobbling toward the exit. She pushed through the glass doors, the cold Ohio air biting at her skin. The park wasn't far, just a few blocks, but each step was agony. Eleanor's crutch sank into the damp grass as she reached the familiar bench under an old oak tree, its branches bare against the starless sky. This was where she'd brought her children years ago, Michael racing with a kite, Sarah sketching the trees, Jake chasing fireflies. She sank onto the bench, her breath ragged, the crutch falling to the ground. "What did I do wrong?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "I gave you everything." The memories flooded back. Late nights working extra shifts to pay for Michael's college, selling her wedding ring to cover Sarah's art classes, cheering at Jake's school plays, even when he forgot his lines. She'd thought love was enough. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "You all right, dear?" Mrs. Lawson, a retired nurse in her 70s, stood nearby, her coat bundled tight against the cold. She'd been walking her dog, a small terrier sniffing the grass, when she noticed Eleanor's hunched figure. Eleanor tried to speak, but a sob escaped instead. Mrs. Lawson sat beside her, her presence warm and steady. "I've seen that look before," she said gently. "You're carrying too much, aren't you?" Eleanor nodded, tears streaming down her face. My kids, they don't want me anymore. Mrs. Lawson placed a hand on Eleanor's arm. Kids forget sometimes, but it's not about you. You're stronger than you know, and stories like yours, they're worth telling. If folks out there are listening, they should subscribe to channels that share these journeys, remind us what family means. Her words were kind but firm, a lifeline in the dark. Eleanor took a shaky breath, her heart stirring with a flicker of resolve. She wasn't ready to give up, not yet. The cold Ohio night wrapped around Eleanor Harris like a shroud, the bare branches of the old oak tree creaking above the park bench where she sat, her crutch discarded in the damp grass. Her hospital gown clung to her frail frame, the stitches on her temple itching under the bandage, her broken hip and fractured femur throbbing with every shallow breath. The pain was a relentless tide, but it was the ache in her heart that threatened to drown her. She stared into the darkness, the park stretching out in shadows that mirrored her memories. Michael running with a kite, Sarah sketching the trees, Jake chasing fireflies under this very tree. Those days felt like another lifetime, when her children's laughter filled her world, when her sacrifices seemed worth it. Now, their words from the hospital echoed in her mind. Send her to a nursing home. Problem solved. Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the blood that had dried on her cheek. What did I do wrong? She whispered, her voice breaking against the silence. Mrs. Lawson, the retired nurse who'd found her, sat quietly beside her, her terrier curled at her feet. The older woman's presence was a steady anchor, her eyes kind but piercing, as if she could see the weight Eleanor carried. You're not alone in this, you know, Mrs. Lawson said softly. I've seen families drift apart, but the love's still there, buried under all the noise. You've given them everything. Don't let their mistakes take that from you. Eleanor shook her head, her hands trembling as they clutched the blue scarf, now torn from her fall. I sold my wedding ring for Sarah's art classes, she said, her voice barely audible. Worked double shifts for Michael's college, stayed up nights when Jake was sick, and now they don't even see me. Mrs. Lawson squeezed her arm. They'll see you again. Sometimes it takes a scare to wake people up. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the ground, where a fallen leaf caught the faint glow of a street lamp. She thought of the nights she'd spent reading bedtime stories, her voice soothing Jake's fears of monsters, or the mornings she'd packed lunches for Sarah, slipping in notes of encouragement. She'd thought love was enough to bind them forever, but somewhere along the way, they drifted into their own worlds. Michael's ambition, Sarah's resentment, Jake's apathy. Yet, as Mrs. Lawson's words sank in, a spark of resolve flickered within her. She wasn't just their mother. She was Eleanor Harris, the woman who'd rebuilt her life after Tom's death, who'd taught classrooms full of kids, who'd kept going despite the pain. I'm not done yet, she murmured, wiping her tears. She reached for her crutch, wincing as she stood, determined to return, not for them, but for herself. Back at the hospital, chaos erupted in the waiting room. A nurse, young and frazzled, burst in, her voice urgent. Your mother's gone. She's not in her bed. Michael froze, his phone slipping from his hand. Sarah's eyes widened, her earlier anger replaced by panic. Jake sat up, his hoodie falling back, his face pale. What do you mean, gone? Michael demanded, his voice shaking. The nurse explained. Eleanor's bed was empty, her crutch missing, the hallway monitors showing her hobbling out the exit. She's injured, fractured hip, broken femur, head trauma. She shouldn't be moving, the nurse said, exasperated. Michael turned to Sarah, his voice sharp. This is your fault. You kept yelling about money. Sarah's face crumpled. My fault? You're the one who wanted to dump her in a home. Jake, for once silent, stared at the floor, his hands trembling. The siblings split up, desperation driving them into the night. Michael drove through the quiet streets, his eyes scanning for Eleanor's frail figure, guilt gnawing at him. He remembered her late-night calls he'd ignored, her gentle questions about his kids brushed off with excuses. Sarah ran toward the park, her breath hitching as she recalled the scrapbook Eleanor kept of her childhood drawings, now gathering dust in the attic. Jake stayed behind, pacing the hospital parking lot, his mind replaying the times he'd taken her money, her trust, without a second thought. Each was alone with their regrets, the weight of their mother's absence pressing down like the cold November air. At the house, Michael arrived first, hoping Eleanor had somehow made it home. The front door was still ajar, Mrs. Carter's call to 911 a haunting reminder of the night's events. He stepped inside, the silence deafening. On the coffee table, he noticed a small box he hadn't seen in years. Eleanor's keepsakes. He opened it, his fingers brushing against a letter in her neat handwriting, dated 10 years ago. Michael, I'm so proud of the man you're becoming. Your strength reminds me of your father. Never forget you're loved. His throat tightened, tears stinging his eyes. He'd forgotten the nights she'd stayed up helping with his college applications, the way she'd cheered at his graduation, even when she was exhausted. Sarah, meanwhile, reached the park, her flashlight sweeping across the empty benches. She stopped at the oak tree, her heart pounding. She remembered sketching it as a girl, Eleanor sitting beside her, praising her talent even when Sarah doubted herself. Back at the house, she'd later climb to the attic, searching for clues, and find the scrapbook, pages filled with her childhood art, each one labeled with Eleanor's loving notes. Sarah, your creativity lights up the world, one read. Sarah sank to her knees, sobbing, the realization hitting her. Her mother had always seen her, even when she felt invisible. Jake, still at the hospital, wandered into Eleanor's room, the empty bed a gut punch. On the side table, he found her old phone, its screen cracked from the fall. He opened it, curious, and stumbled on a video. A school play, Jake at 12, fumbling his lines as Eleanor's voice cheered from the audience. You're doing great, Jake. His chest tightened. He'd taken her money, her kindness, and given nothing back. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered, his voice breaking. As dawn broke, Eleanor hobbled back toward the house, each step a battle against her broken body. Mrs. Lawson had called a cab, insisting on helping her home. The park had given Eleanor clarity. She deserved respect, not just love. She entered the house, finding Michael, Sarah, and Jake gathered in the living room, their faces a mix of relief and shame. Mom, Sarah cried, rushing to her, but Eleanor raised a hand, her eyes steady despite the pain. I heard you, she said, her voice firm. I heard what I am to you, a problem. But I'm your mother, and I'm still here. Michael's eyes dropped, Sarah's filled with tears, and Jake looked away, unable to meet her gaze. The room fell silent, the weight of their mistakes hanging heavy. A voice seemed to echo, as if from a documentary narrator, cutting through the tension. Families break, but they can mend, if we listen. Subscribe to our channel to follow stories of forgiveness and second chances. Eleanor didn't hear it, her focus on her children. She wasn't ready to forgive, not yet, but she saw the flicker of remorse in their eyes. It was a start. The living room of the Harris house felt smaller than ever, its walls closing in under the weight of unspoken truths. Dawn light filtered through the dusty curtains, casting a pale glow over the cluttered space. Faded photos on the mantel, a half-knitted scarf on the armchair, the air thick with the scent of cold chili left untouched from the night before. Eleanor Harris stood in the center, her crutch digging into the worn carpet, her hospital gown replaced by a sweater Mrs. Carter had lent her. The stitches on her temple were stark against her pale skin, her broken hip and fractured femur forcing her to lean heavily on the crutch. Each movement a reminder of the fall that had nearly taken her life. Yet her eyes burned with a quiet strength. A fire kindled in the park under the oak tree where she'd faced the truth. She was more than the burden her children saw. Michael, Sarah, and Jake stood before her, their faces a mix of relief and shame, the silence between them heavy with the echoes of their hospital argument. Eleanor's voice, though soft, cut through the room like a blade. I heard you, she said, her gaze steady despite the pain radiating through her body. In the hospital, when you thought I was asleep, I heard what I am to you. A problem to be solved, a cost to be split, someone to be sent away. Her words landed hard, each one a stone dropped into still water. Michael shifted uncomfortably, his tie still loosened from the night's chaos, his corporate armor useless here. Sarah's eyes glistened, her arms crossed tightly as if to shield herself from the truth. Jake, his hoodie pulled low, stared at the floor, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. I gave you everything, Eleanor continued, her voice trembling but resolute. I worked nights to pay for your college, Michael. Sold my ring for your art classes, Sarah. Stayed up when you were sick, Jake, even when I was falling apart. I thought that's what mothers do. Give until there's nothing left. But I'm not nothing. Her crutch wobbled, and she gripped it tighter, refusing to falter. I deserve respect, not just love. And if you can't give that, I'll find my own way. Michael's face crumpled, the weight of her words breaking through his defenses. He stepped forward, his voice hoarse. Mom, I didn't mean it like that. I'm drowning. Work, the kids, the bills. I thought a nursing home would be easier for you, for all of us. He paused, his eyes dropping to the letter he still clutched, the one he'd found in her keepsake box. I read your letter, the one you wrote when I got into college. You said I was your strength like Dad. But I've been weak, Mom. I ignored you, and I'm sorry. His voice cracked, tears spilling down his cheeks. He'd always been the responsible one, the son who carried the family's expectations, but now he saw how he'd failed the one who'd carried him. Sarah's breath hitched, her own tears falling as she stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. I was so angry, Mom. I thought you loved Michael more, that you gave him everything while I got scraps. But I found the scrapbook in the attic. My drawings, your notes. You kept every one, even the bad ones. She laughed, a broken sound. You wrote that I lit up the world. I forgot that. I've been so caught up in my own mess, I didn't see you struggling. Her hands shook as she wiped her face, the resentment she'd carried for years crumbling under the weight of her mother's love. Jake was the last to speak, his voice small, almost childlike. He'd stayed silent, his guilt a knot in his chest, but Eleanor's words forced him to look up. I'm the worst, he said, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. I took your money, Mom. Lied to your face. I was in the house when you fell, and I didn't hear. I didn't care. He pulled her cracked phone from his pocket, the video of his school play still paused on the screen. You were there for me, cheering even when I screwed up. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. His voice broke, and he looked away, ashamed but earnest, the first crack in his armor of apathy. Eleanor listened, her heart torn between pain and hope. Their apologies were raw, imperfect, but they were a start. She leaned on her crutch, her body aching, her mind still clouded from the trauma of her fall, broken bones, a gash on her head, the looming uncertainty of her recovery. I don't know if I can trust you yet, she said, her voice steady now. Love isn't enough anymore. You need to show me you're different. Not just say it. I'm not going anywhere. Not to a nursing home, not out of your lives, but things have to change. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. Michael nodded slowly, his jaw tight with resolve. We'll figure it out, Mom, together. Sarah reached for Eleanor's hand, her touch tentative but warm. I want to be better, she whispered. Jake, still clutching the phone, added quietly, Me too. It wasn't a perfect promise, but it was honest, and for Eleanor, that was enough for now. Later that week, the Harris family sat in a small office, the air thick with the scent of coffee and old books. Dr. Ellis, a therapist in her 50s with a calm demeanor, leaned forward, her notepad open. This is a safe space, she said, her voice steady. But healing takes work. You've all hurt each other, and it won't fix itself overnight. Eleanor sat across from her children, her crutch propped against the chair, her body still frail, but her spirit unyielding. Michael spoke first, admitting how his ambition had blinded him to his mother's loneliness. Sarah confessed her resentment, her voice breaking as she described the years she felt unseen. Jake, quieter than usual, admitted his selfishness, his words halting but sincere. The session was tense, voices rising at times, tears falling at others. Eleanor listened, her heart heavy but hopeful. She spoke of her own pain, the fall, the betrayal, the fear that she'd lost her children forever. I want us to be a family again, she said, her voice soft but firm. But I need you to meet me halfway. Dr. Ellis nodded, jotting notes. This is just the beginning, she said. You've taken the first step, but there's a long road ahead. As they left the office, the Ohio sky was gray, a light drizzle falling over the quiet town. Eleanor walked slowly, her crutch tapping the pavement, her children at her side. Michael carried her bag, Sarah held an umbrella over her, and Jake stayed close, his usual swagger gone. The house loomed ahead, its peeling paint and cluttered rooms a reminder of the work still to be done. But for the first time in years, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. Not a fairy tale ending, but a chance to rebuild. She glanced at her children, their faces marked by guilt and determination, and thought of the oak tree in the park, its roots deep, despite the barren branches. Families, like trees, could weather storms if they held fast. The drizzle thickened, and Eleanor tightened her grip on the crutch, her scarf, repaired by Mrs. Carter, draped over her shoulders. She wasn't whole, not yet, but she was still here, and that was enough. 3 weeks later, the Harris house felt a little less heavy, though the scars of the past lingered in its cluttered corners. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, her crutch propped nearby, her fractured hip and femur still healing, the stitches on her temple faded but visible. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air. A small victory. She'd made it herself today. Michael stood at the counter, slicing apples for a pie, his tie replaced by a worn sweater, his usual rush softened by the quiet morning. Sarah sat across from Eleanor, sketching in a notebook, her lines softer, her smile tentative as she showed her mother a drawing of the oak tree from the park. "For you," she said, her voice shy but warm. Jake, no longer glued to his phone, carried a stack of dishes to the sink, his movements awkward but earnest. "Need help, Mom?" he asked, meeting her eyes for a moment. Eleanor nodded, her heart cautious but hopeful. The table wasn't set for 4 yet, but they were here, trying. Outside, the Ohio rain fell gently, washing the windows clean. Eleanor touched Sarah's sketch, her fingers steady. "We're learning," she whispered, and for now, that was enough.